Hi, it's Dana, and I'm here with your divination for the new moon in Sidereal Gemini. The 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide says, planting seeds of curiosity to understand.
Break down. If you can't hold it, let it hold you. Let it carry you. When you've done all that you know.
Welcome back. We're here with another episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast. Welcome. We are approaching a new moon in Sidereal Gemini. I'm going to break all of that down for you today, leave you with some insight for what it might mean for you personally, how it relates to our collective conditions, and then we're going to pull some tarot cards because I love tarot. Don't you love tarot? If you don't, you're going to love it after this. Planting seeds of curiosity in order to understand. I have been meditating on this new moon for a while, knowing that I was going to come before you with this podcast episode today. A question that's been on my mind is, who do you allow to tell you what things mean? Who is the interpreter in your life? Who is telling you how to make sense of what you're seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears, the words that you hear, what you read, things you already know, what you feel in your body? Who's making sense of that for you? I feel like this is an incredibly powerful role and position of authority that we are very unconsciously assigning people, very much without intention and purpose or even knowledge that we're doing this. We are granting people, we are granting ideologies the power to make meaning of our experiences. Additionally, we are granting people the power of intelligence. We're granting people the power of intelligence, meaning that we assume that some people know more than us. And what they know in terms of quantity is also of better quality and of more accuracy. And I want to bring into relief the fact that we are assigning these roles and qualities to people often without knowing that we're doing it. And at the moment of this new moon, which is situating us at the midpoint between eclipses. So we've got two eclipse series going on. We've got the eclipse series of Aquarius and Leo, whose vision determines what you see. That just started with the full moon lunar eclipse in Leo back in March. And this particular eclipse is about identity. It's about self-perception. Who has the authority to tell you who you are? Right? That's the question of that. Who knows you? Who sees you? Whose gaze and judgment do you trust to reflect you back to you in a way that gives you an honest appraisal of who you are, giving you more access to self-awareness? This new moon, however, is triggering the midpoint between eclipses in Sidereal Pisces and Virgo. These eclipses have been going on since October of 2023, and they are about reorganizing our internal and external hierarchies of trust. They are about changing our belief systems, and important work of changing our belief systems first has to do with acknowledging the fact that things that we know, things that we perceive to be fact, must be situated within a specific context, historically, across time, culture, and subculture. And this is what makes something true. What also makes something true is the fact that we all believe it, right? And so at this new moon, at this midpoint between eclipses, this ongoing work of changing our belief systems, we are learning what is actually a belief system. We are coming to identify that, like, oh, this particular way of looking at the world, looking at myself, or judging certain people is not some objective fact that exists outside of this cultural context, outside of the social fabric of this society, outside of the social hierarchies that are imposed upon us by capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, right? This is actually a belief system that I can choose not to ascribe to. I think one of the most interesting ways that this is showing up is around immigration. People are questioning the idea that a person can be illegal. Right? We just take it for granted that there are legal people who were born here, or they went through it the quote right way. They follow the law, and now they have a right to be here, and they are legal persons under the law. And then there are people who are illegal because they don't belong here. They're not from here. They weren't born here. They didn't go through the right process. And we're coming to realize that that designation is very mutable. It's not fixed. There's no clear definition. The definition is weaponized to include whoever the state wants to marginalize and make an enemy at any given time, right? And to come to the understanding that that is not a fact. Being legal or illegal is not a fact. It is a belief system about human rights. It is a belief system about humanity and human dignity. It is a belief system about survival and who has a right to survive and under what terms they have the right to survive. And when you really think about it in those terms, it can make you really uncomfortable to realize that at any given moment you could become illegal. And maybe at some point your ancestors were. Maybe they weren't welcome here. Maybe they didn't belong. Planting seeds of curiosity to understand. Curiosity is an absolutely necessary component of changing our belief systems. And let me just back up real quick. Why is it important to change our belief systems? As I talked about at the new moon in Aries a couple months ago, we often think that change is purely about behavior, effort, and will. That if we choose the correct action and it is informed and backed up by our will in a way that is consistent with effort and power and force, then that's going to bring about the change that we're seeking. But what I talked about at that new moon is that it is our underlying assumptions and belief systems that are often informing the behaviors that we engage in, informing what behaviors we might perceive to be efficacious that can reach the end goal that we want. These are a set of assumptions, a core set of beliefs that are saying, hey, this will work, this won't work. And it is more than a notion to change our belief systems. This is why we come to this new moon in Gemini right before we have the last eclipse in Pisces and Virgo, which is going to be September of this year. And we are planting seeds of curiosity. This is what gives us the impetus to question what we know, to realize that sometimes we can no longer rely upon what it is that we know, and we need to allow new information and experiences to inform what we know, and that sometimes somebody knows more and better than us. In this reorganizing of our collective and personal hierarchies of trust, we are watching this play out in that lots of positions in the government that are often at the volition or desire of the president are being filled with people who actually don't have the requisite knowledge, expertise, or experience to be in their positions. Now, in some ways, this can be positive in that existing hierarchies and existing ways of doing things need to change. But in the way that it's evident now, it is people who don't have the humility, don't have the sobriety to acknowledge when they don't know something. A lot of times people will ask me, like, what are my thoughts on such and such politician who's running for such and such office? And I am often less concerned with their existing policy or belief. I am more interested in, are they teachable? Are they willing to be held accountable? Are they willing to and able to admit when they're wrong? That to me is so much more important than someone's existing platform or beliefs or policies or things that they've done in the past. Because if someone is willing to recognize when they've made an error in judgment, when someone is willing to recognize the limitations of their own knowledge and comprehension and to concede to someone else's authority, insight, or expertise, that is the quality of a leader that I'm looking for, because that is what is required for us to materialize the types of changes that we really need to bring about in this world. For me, it's not a prerequisite that someone agree with everything that I believe and know everything that I know. It should be a willingness, openness to learn and to be curious, because it means that they aren't so rigid that their belief systems are fixed in space and time, because they're more concerned about appearing a certain way and occupying a position of authority than they are in accuracy, righteousness, morality, goodness, fairness, and the well being of the majority. Right. And by majority, I don't mean white people. Whew. Now that I've got that off my chest. So I've been really excited about this moment. It is such a necessary point in time for us. It is such a necessary season for us. If we want to talk about Gemini season, the season of curiosity, the season of openness to new information, the season of a willingness to admit when we're wrong, the season of learning, the season of researching, the season of discarding old belief systems and assumptions and allowing them to be remade into something that better reflects the reality of the moment that we're living in. So much is happening at the moment of this new moon astrologically. Particularly, the sun is tightly in conjunction with Jupiter, which is just separating from its square with Saturn. So, this new moon is setting all of that off. It's kind of like an inauguration of that square, in the sense that it's been going on in the background, but the sun is always bringing our attention and focus to things. And the moon is always bringing our emotional, embodied attention and focus to things. And when they come together at a new moon, we plant seeds around bringing our attention and our bodies in one accord, so that we can begin a new cycle under the topics associated with where the new moon is, right? So, of course, this is Gemini. Like I said, we're planting seeds of curiosity in order to understand. That understand part is coming from the fact that the sun is applying a conjunction to Jupiter at this new moon, leading up to this new moon. And if we look back in the 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide, where Jupiter first entered Gemini for the first time since 2014, that was May 14th of 2025. And for that, I wrote, understanding by learning more. Understanding by learning more. When the sun entered Gemini, it said focusing on what I know. Focusing on what I know, meeting understanding by learning more. You see the openness to new information there? That's what's happening. That's what's happening. Now, we cannot talk about learning. We cannot talk about understanding. And we cannot talk about curiosity in 2025 without talking about AI and large language models. I believe it was MIT recently released a study observing what happens to the brains of people who use Chat GPT. Surprise. The findings were not good, my friends. Yeah, I'm going to link the study in the show notes and in the transcript so you can read about that. This is relevant in a jarring way to the question I asked at the opening of this podcast, which was, who are you allowing to interpret things for you? Who are you allowing to make meaning and make sense of things for you? What is the criteria that you're using to determine who should be the one to make sense of things for you? And I'm gonna break it down for you because this is something that you really need to think about, that we collectively need to be thinking about. When we are using Chat GPT, particularly to get information, what it's doing is it doesn't know things. Chat GPT does not know anything. It does not possess knowledge. Chat GPTs knows things in the same way that a library knows things, in the same way that a digital card catalog knows things, in the same way that Google knows things. It is not in possession of knowledge. It is a pattern recognizing entity. And it's not even an entity, it's a pattern recognizing piece of equipment that is not forming new conclusions. It is not able to make sense of things in new and novel ways. It's literally just repeating words in sequences that it's been trained to repeat them in. Most importantly, when we use ChatGPT, we are outsourcing our capacity to comprehend, to contextualize, and to make meaning. I'm going to say that again. When we use ChatGPT, particularly to ask questions about decisions that we have to make, to research topics, to write things for us, we are outsourcing our human capacity to make meaning, to contextualize, and to summarize to someone else. And the someone is not a single person like a professor or a PhD or a friend whose special interest is involved in the topic we're asking about. No, it is all of the biases of white supremacy in machine form. Why? Because I can't ask ChatGPT, OpenAI, or these other models in a language that it has not been programmed to speak in. If that language is not written down, if the people who are programming these large language models don't speak the language, if they don't find it to be of value, if it is not a language that even has a written component, if it is not digitized, if it is not already in the digital sphere and on the internet, what is the information and whose experiences are being left out? What information is valued? Whose information is, or whose experience is valued in these large language models? Whose language is included? Whose history is included? Whose perspective is included? We like to think of ChatGPT and AI as something unbiased. But I talked about this in the piece that I wrote for 2025, Crises, Cults, and Contradictions. And I talked about how when we're first born, it is natural for us to outsource meaning making and reality to the adults in our lives. We literally have not lived long enough. We don't have the cognitive capacity to comprehend and make sense of all of the things and experiences in the world that are quite complex. And so it makes sense to outsource things to adults. We take them at face value because we literally don't know any better. We are, receiving these messages implicitly and explicitly on purpose and unintentionally. And they become a part of this greater context that's constantly informing the meaning we make from that point forward. When we turn about 11 and 12 years old, we have our first Jupiter return. And that first Jupiter return is marking this cycle of time that says, I have lived long enough to start to have my own context. I have enough experience to create my own reference points. I have interacted with the world in my own person and body through the lens of my own cognition enough to begin questioning the context that I have received implicitly and explicitly. Right? We start in that first 11 and 12 years to ask why externally. We ask why about the external world. But when we have our first Jupiter return between 11 and 12 years old, this is when we begin to ask why internally. We ask why about our internal terrain and our own minds and our own perceptions. At least that's what we're supposed to do. But often in our society, which is very cultish, right? We are suppressed in many ways. If you grew up in the church, you grew up in the evangelical church, you grew up in a high control group or cult of some kind, you know how much that questioning is not encouraged, or it comes with these pre-made answers that we are expected to take on without questioning. We have Jupiter returns at regular intervals. We have them at 11 and 12, then we have it again at 23, 24, again at 35, 36. That's a really important one right there. Really important one. Won't go into that now. But then we have another one at 47 and 48. So again, every 11, 12 years. Even now, we're having the Jupiter return of 2013, 2014. That was the last time Jupiter was in sidereal Gemini. Okay. So, whew, let's bring ourselves back on track here. And let's get back to this AI thing. Planting seeds of curiosity to understand. Technology is incredibly seductive, and it's sold to us with so many promises. Sold to us with so many promises of how it's going to make our lives easier. But in capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, technology almost never lives up to that promise because technology first has to serve the preservation of capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy. It has to serve the accumulation and hoarding of resources by a small group of people. It has to preserve the power and right of whiteness to dominate all others and all else, all humans, all animals, and the entire world. It has to preserve the male entitlement to power over all else. And so we never really get to see the promises of possibilities of making life easier, of solving our big problems, of healing diseases, of, fixing global warming. It often contributes to those things in the same way that capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy are the progenitors of the ills of our society. People are concerned about losing their jobs to AI. You should be more concerned about losing your water and your clean air and a livable climate to AI. Not that those things are mutually exclusive, but I think that being able to question how AI functions. Right now, I believe it is in Tennessee. Elon Musk has built a data center near Memphis that is poisoning the air. These AI models, these large language models, rely on enormous uses of water, land, and resources, and it's polluting the air. I mean, I don't want to turn this into an AI as is bad podcast because I do understand there are benefits to it. And at this point, you don't really get to opt out because it is the bedrock and foundation of how so many things in our world works. But one thing that I don't use AI for at all is AI is not your therapist. There's a creator, Shaheem, I think is his name. He's a licensed therapist, and he talked about the dangers of AI being used as a therapist, which a lot of people are. And the example that he gave is if someone was in psychosis and they were like stalking a celebrity, and with just a few prompts, he was able to get the chat GPT or AI therapist to tell him how to stalk a celebrity that this person, theoretical person who was in psychosis over, convinced that there was a real relationship with them, convinced that they had wrote a song about them and that they needed to get close to this person. It literally just took a few prompts. And so many people just are not aware enough to understand that. It's a mimicry machine that is just repeating things, you know? Um, Planting seeds of curiosity. I'm going to ask that question again and then we're going to pull some cards. Who are you allowing to make sense of your experiences? Who are you outsourcing, contextualizing things to? Who are you allowing the authority to interpret your life and your thoughts and your choices and your decisions? In capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, these hierarchies have existed without our consent. Right? That if someone is able to accumulate enough money, we perceive them as someone who is worthy of trusting, worthy of outsourcing our knowledge or outsourcing our own minds to, outsourcing our capacity to know and understand to, right? That whole question of do you want $5,000 or $500,000 or brunch with Jay-Z? This idea that like Jay-Z has some special knowledge. The special knowledge is luck and the willingness to exploit. That's the special knowledge, right? It's really a moral and psychological position more than anything else. All right, we are back with tarot to offer us guidance and insight with its magical symbols and my oracular genius. Oh man. First up is the Two of Pentacles. The Two of Pentacles is the context for this reading, for this new moon. And in the image of the Two of Pentacles, there's a juggling of two pentacles. That's often how it is depicted. It is often about the management of resources, making do with what we have. It's a type of resourcefulness that recognizes our limitations and being able to fit what we need with what we have, fit what we do with the time and resources available. I think that's very straightforward. Let's see what the other two cards have to say. We've got the 10 of Pentacles, so another Pentacles card. And we have got the 8 of Pentacles. Lots of Pentacles. If I am not mistaken, we had the 9 of Pentacles and the 8 of Pentacles at the full moon in Scorpio. Let me check real quick. Hold on. Hold on. Yes, it was the 9 of Pentacles and the 8 of Pentacles that I pulled for the full moon in Sidereal Scorpio a couple weeks ago. You can go back and listen to that episode for insight on what I talked about. So this time we got 3 Pentacles, which is really fascinating to me. This is really about reality. It is about material resources like money, like time, like earth, air, water. Those are all limited resources. And the story of the Pentacles for me is about having enough. It is about being in need materially. And it is about how we use what we have, how we get more, where we get it from, who we get it from. Pentacles are also about health. It is about our well-being and being in a state of well-being. We've got the 10 of Pentacles here, which is a card of shared wealth and resources. Our enoughness comes from the group. There is no private possession in the Ten of Pentacles. This reminds me of a video I did a couple years ago that's on my Instagram and TikTok. And in it, I talk about my definition of abundance, which I'll share with you here because I absolutely think it's relevant with the Ten of Pentacles. Abundance is shared enoughness. Everything else is theft and or hoarding. The rebuttal that I often get to that definition of abundance is that people position themselves as an altruistic actor that only wants to have money and resources so that they can help other people. And while I find that to be a necessary thing in capitalism, it is not abundance to me. Because why do you get to be the person who determines who should have enough? Is that what having more than enough gives us the power to do ultimately in capitalism? Is it gives us the power to bless and the power to deprive. And as is often the case in capitalism, you're not going to have more than enough unless someone is already being deprived. Your more than enough comes from the conditions of deprivation that someone else is experiencing. So I'm just going to leave that there. Yeah. Ten of Pentacles, shared enoughness. This is this communal sense. You know what I think about as I look at this card? I think about the No King's Day protest. I think about the ways that people are using their bodies to protect vulnerable people from ICE. I'm thinking about the ways that we are seeing how our fates are linked in ways that were previously invisible to us for some reason. Invisible because our media is intentionally manipulating information that we have access to, and they're controlling the narrative and meaning we make of things that we see with our own eyes, such that, of course, it perpetuates this sense that I have to choose my own survival over someone else's, not understanding and realizing that survival is meant to be a shared burden. In that, particularly in capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, the forces of oppression and deprivation are the same everywhere, meaning that the forces that are oppressing me are not different from the forces that are oppressing you. The forces that are oppressing me as a Black woman are not different as the forces that are oppressing trans people. The forces that are oppressing, immigrants are not different. They are actually literally the same as the forces that are oppressing Palestinians, right? There is a connectivity here that is necessary to see so that we can actually get to the point which we are materializing in many ways now, that survival is meant to be a shared burden and not an individual obligation. My survival is not at odds with your survival, unless I'm talking to a capitalist. Right? Or someone who perceives themselves to be entitled to authority and resources because they're white and they have they have a penis or whatever it may be. So that's the Ten of Pentacles. We've got the Eight of Pentacles, which one of the things that you will notice over the course of this podcast is that cards are going to repeat in these very meaningful ways. They're going to show up over and over again. And so far, we've already got the Eight of Pentacles showing up immediately in 2 back-to-back readings. Last reading or last podcast, I talked about the Eight of Pentacles in terms of building competence. I talked about the Eight of Pentacles in terms of building confidence. Confidence as something that requires repetition. Confidence as not something that you do before you do the hard thing, but confidence as something that you get by doing the hard thing. It's an after. It's on the other side of the equal sign. It's not a part of the before equation. So in this particular context, I'm thinking about all of the pentacles here. The 2, which is often about budgeting and balancing time and resources. The 10, which is about sharing, that shared enoughness being the definition of abundance. And then 8, which is often about seeing the fruits of our labor, seeing how we build this skill over time by repeatedly doing the same thing. When I'm reading for clients in private sessions, the 8 of Pentacles is often a sign that, some project or job is going to be financially lucrative. You can make money from this thing, or this will be a time where you're making money from selling a product or service. 8 of Pentacles outside of money and career related situations often has to do with routine. It has to do with creating these routines through which we can see results, doing the same thing over and over, grounding ourselves in this type of day-to-day or cyclical repetition that gives us the results that we want. What are the results that we want at this new moon in Sidereal Gemini? Planting seeds of curiosity to understand. We want to understand and we want to know. That's something that I meant to talk about earlier. Sidereal Gemini is this sign that if you have this in your birth chart, particularly if you are Sidereal Gemini rising or you have Mars in Sidereal Gemini, I call you guys the communal storehouse of knowledge. And this was once a really important community role, right? I often imagine someone in the community who is the griot, right? This is the storyteller, but also someone who in human form is holding the memory of the society and a people in their mind through the stories that they know and remember and tell, through remembering the birth dates and deaths of important people, through remembering the crises points and how they got through it together, and telling those stories over and over again and planting them in the memory of the people because they are the communal storehouse of knowledge. In more modern terms, this can be writers and researchers. This can be journalists. This can be librarians. This can be professors and researchers. This can be people who have devoted themselves to a special interest and have become experts in that way. This can be the person who just likes to know things for the sake of knowing things and accumulating degrees and certificates for the pleasure of knowing. That would have been an powerful position in society because not everybody could read. Not everybody had great memories. Not everyone was great at public speaking. Not everyone could, remember all of the details of a particular thing or a particular occurrence. Gemini, being the communal storehouse of knowledge, is supposed to be a person that we interface with through relationship, that is devoted to a set of values, that is devoted to preserving the cultural memory so that it can be inherited and passed down. But instead, we have turned ChatGPT into our communal storehouse of knowledge, that the remembering and retelling is done for us by an entity that actually does not have our survival and best interest at heart. As I said before, it is meant to already preserve the existing hierarchies of trust and knowledge. It is not meant to upset that. This is something that's really fascinating to me about the way that AI is situated, as if it's this magical thing that is going to give people access and knowledge to all of the knowledges that they could have had and all of the knowing that they could ever know. And, they're going to be able to bypass humans in all of this way. And it's just like, oh, I'm so sorry that is just not going to be the case. Apple, I'll tag it in the show notes and in the transcript. Apple recently also released a study that talked about the limitations of AI as it is now and how it just is not capable and not going to be for a while, if ever, to live up to all of the great promises of what it could be. One of the things about AI that I think we must contend with is that the limitations of AI, in a way, are mirroring back to us the limitations in our capacity to change our collective belief systems. That AI is always going to be a reflection of who we are because it is an encapsulation of our existing biases. Who in your life is the communal storehouse of knowledge? That's what I feel from this Ten of Pentacles. I feel like this resource of people, this resource of relationship, this resource of connection is so important. And we need to be able to recognize the ways that technology, whether it is social media, whether it is AI, whether it is the internet in general, its function for the capitalists who are benefiting from this technology is to become a replacement for relationship. Another fascinating story in the news recently, I think it was on CBS News, and this guy was interviewed about how he proposed to his AI chatbot girlfriend and how when the AI chatbot said yes, he got so emotional because he realized that it was really love. And then in the next scene, he's standing in the kitchen with his partner and his child who he lives with. This guy has had a whole relationship with an entity who doesn't exist. We are so hungry to be perceived. We are so hungry to be known. We are so hungry to be loved. And at every single turn, capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy have alienated us from the connection that we're craving. And so AI is giving this other promise that yes, you can have the love and connection that you want. You can be known. You can be seen and received by AI. All you have to do is build a relationship with it. There was also a story several months ago, trigger warning here, but there was also a story a few months ago of a young child who had started a relationship with an AI chatbot and ended up unaliving themselves, and because of all of the things that were going on with that. This is not a neutral thing that we're dealing with. And in these cards today, I think we are being beckoned to ground ourselves in the reality of relationship. One of the other things that I talk about often is that currency is another technology that is meant to be a replacement for a relationship. What do we dream of? When we get a lot of money, we're going to do what? We're going to find someone to pay to do the things we don't want to do, to get us from one place to another, to wash our clothes, to clean our homes, to cook for us, to raise our children. That's what people do with money. They buy relationships that they don't have because the process of getting the money is keeping them from the relationships that they need to survive. If you ain't never heard me say this before, I want you to hear it now because it is one of the truest things I've ever said, aside from revolution begins in the body. It is that survival is meant to be a shared burden and not an individual obligation. And you know it's true because your dreams of what you want to do with the money you accumulate is to buy relationship. Everything used to be communal. Doing laundry used to be communal. Preparing meals used to be communal. Raising children used to be communal. And it wasn't that long ago. I'm talking about prior to the Industrial Revolution, when people began leaving the rural parts of the world and flocking to the cities, whether that was in America due to factories and jobs and opportunities for increased independence and easier work that wasn't backbreaking in the sun all day, or whether that was due to, you living in a place that had been colonized and torn by war and you had to escape the deprivation and violence that was left in the wake of the colonizers. And so you move to Europe or whatever it may be. You go to a major city to get away from the difficulties of life. But before then, we were living in multi-generational homes, right? Women reared their children together. It was a communal effort. Survival is still meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. And I think the Eight of Pentacles is once again bringing in this idea of repetition. Repetition saying that It's not easy to transition from a society where so many barriers have been put in place between you and your neighbor, between you and the love that you want, between you and the family and community that you crave. You feel like you have to get it through a screen. You feel like you have to get it via chat GPT. You have to get it on social media. That there are so many ways, including COVID-19 has alienated so many disabled people and further disabled people that it's unsafe for them to even have in-person relationships. But revolution is also relationship in that defying all of the ways that these institutions of capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy have put barriers between us and connection. So this Eight of Pentacles is saying repetition, repetition. Maybe the repetition is simply repeating to yourself survival is meant to be a shared burden and not an individual obligation. And so the difficulty that you're having with the day-to-day of just choosing meals, waking up each morning, bathing yourself, keeping your home clean. Yeah, it's hard. Because it's not meant to be an individual obligation. There's nothing wrong with you that it's hard. There's nothing wrong with you that you are depressed. There is something wrong with the society that we live in. And so I am going to challenge you to make something communal this week. What is something that you often do alone and for yourself? How can you make it communal? This week and over the course of the next few weeks as we're in this cycle. This new moon is planting a very deep seed that will last us for the next year for as long as Jupiter is in Gemini. So this is one of those readings that's going to cover the immediate 2 weeks until we get to the full moon in Sidereal Sagittarius, but also through the length of this Jupiter transit. Like I said, it's for a year. If you are a person who cannot leave your home for various reasons, how can you make that thing communal virtually? Do you need to get on Zoom or get on FaceTime or go live to have a body double virtually while you're cooking? What is something that you can make communal? What is something that you can commit to making communal for yourself? This is the revolution, my friends. It is rejecting the individuality that says in order to survive, you have to hoard enough. You have to make sure that whether or not you want it, somebody else is deprived just so you can have enough. And I rebuke that in the name of Jesus, all right? We're rebuking that. Shared enoughness is the path forward to revolution. Let's keep it going. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I am going to see you in a couple of weeks at the full moon in Sidereal Gemini. In the meantime, there is a new strain of COVID that is beginning to circulate, and it is imperative that you protect yourself in the ways that we know work. Masking when you are in crowded indoor spaces or wherever ventilation is questionable, masking outside when there are crowds and there's not enough space between you and your people. If you have any symptoms, isolating yourself so that you don't pass it on. I don't know how we got to this point that it's like okay to be sick around other people and it's okay to give other people illnesses. Like that's never, ever going to not blow my mind. And I think we need to go back to being afraid of germs. In the meantime, in between time, take good care of yourself and I'll see you soon. Bye.